What did you say your names were again?
I'm Michael.
And I'm DC, and we have a podcast called Welcome to the Red Table. We were told you were the guy to talk to about all things horror, and since we're attending the same convention together right now, we thought we'd try to catch up with you.
Ah, yes. Well, my name is Frederick Jebediah Bucephalus Abel St. Meyer XIII, and I am a lifelong expert on the subjects of hunting, etiquette at fancy meals, and horror.
So, could you talk to us about the future of horror?
Right. Well, let me tell you something about horror. Leave it alone. Who in the frick do these people think they are to think that they can come up in here and mess with horror? The future of horror? Let me tell you something. The future of horror is already here. And it has been since the day it began, and there ain't nobody needing to come up in here and mess with it. I mean, have you heard the name of that new movie that came out this year? It!
Yeah, it was a great movie.
Absolutely, we loved that movie.
Really enjoyed that.
That was it! It was called It! What in the hellfire were they thinking? It don't make no sense at all. That's all they're gonna name it is It? What does it even mean anyway? A movie title has got to mean something. They can't just go around naming it. Whoever thought up that name must be a numbnut sitting in his basement playing video games or something. His brain ain't quite firing on all the cylinders, is it? And apparently, it was about a clown. A clown! There ain't nothing scary about a damn clown. Clowns are downright hilarious. Whoever made that story up must be a psychologically disturbed individual with significant childhood issues.
Mr. St. Meyer, that was Stephen King.
Stupid, stupid, stupid. And there was another one, Happy Death Day. I heard about it. What in the hellfire were they thinking? Stupid is what they were thinking. And I ain't dumb, no sir. I understand that they are playing with words and twisting up the phraseology happy birthday, but it's just plain unnecessary. Again, it has got to mean something. And to think someone wants to sit through a 2-hour movie that repeats itself over and over and over? Stupid, stupid, stupid. What in the hellfire are these people doing these days sitting up in their fancy studios and their high-class lazy boys thinking up this stuff? Somebody is getting paid way too much for coming up with stupid. And who had the bright idea of remaking the classics? Have you heard that they are trying to bring back Halloween? Halloween?
Yeah, they even have Jamie Lee Curtis coming back to reprise her role. It's actually very exciting.
Listen, folks, Halloween never left the building. That was Elvis, and that was an entirely different event altogether. Leave it alone. They're trying to remake Friday the 13th. Nightmare on Elm Street, too. Who the frick is thinking up this stuff? It's called Nightmare on Elm Street for a reason, folks. Nightmare. Hello. Do you two understand what I'm saying?
I don't really understand.
Not really? Sorry. What do you mean?
Are you listening? And then they're trying to mash them all up, as though somehow Jason and Freddy actually knew each other. They have done gone and lost all their damn minds. Stupid, stupid, stupid. There ain't no way those two could ever meet one another. There ain't no one in their right mind who's gonna go mix up those two worlds, dumb as I ever heard.
But that, that movie did actually happen, and a lot of people did actually enjoy it.
These people got my crackers firing hot, and I'm pissing mad. The future of horror has already come and passed, and these new hippies up in Hollywood needs to leave them the hellfire alone.
Mr. Frederick St. Meyer, sir, I don't think they're hippies in Hollywood anymore.
Stupid! I'm telling you. Listen here. You keep making up these stupid little stories for that YourTube video machine. Did you know they call them pasta? What the frickin'? How do you listen to pasta? And what the hellfire is so scary about food? My God! They're gonna run horror right into the daggum grave. Listen here, hippies. You eat pasta. And you watch horror on the television box. You don't mess with the classics, and you stop making up these stupid titles that nobody with any sense about them understands. Stop trying to break what already works. People need to learn what horror is about all over again. It's a damn scary movie with a title that makes damn sense, and a guy with a chip on his damn shoulder running around town with a damn machete, hacking people up. Sitting in the dark in your damn favorite chair with a damn beer in your hand and nothing more and nothing less. Leave it the hellfire alone.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong stereotype, though, and I mean, I think we're all trying to move on from that. Slashers have a place in horror, but they don't comprise all of horror.
My name is Frederick Jebediah Bucephalus Abel St. Meyer the 13th, and if you ain't hearing me, you ain't listening.
Welcome to the Red Table, episode 4, where we're talking about the future of horror. Michael, speaking to Mr. St. Meyer, I guess that's what we need to call him. I don't know. He's got all those names, but he came on high recommendation as somebody who really was in the know. Kind of a strange fella.
That's one or two words for it, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, well, it was fun talking to him at least, and catching up with him. We'll see if we run into him in the future. One announcement I want to make up front is that Welcome to the Red Table. We've been doing this under the Monster Guys podcast feed since we began. Kind of on purpose, we wanted to get it off the ground. Now, in 2018, just to let everybody know, we're going to be moving Welcome to the Red Table over to our horror publishing arm. I don't know how many people know this, but we have several imprints in our publishing company. Dark Waters Press is our horror arm. So we're going to be moving Welcome to the Red Table over to be published under Dark Waters Press from 2018 on, which will help us drill down to our target audience and put it in the right place. And it's been fun having it on the Monster Guys feed, but we want these two shows to grow on their own. So that'll be moving over in 2018 to Dark Waters Press. We'll give you all the links and all the info for that. Basically doesn't mean a whole lot for you because you're still going to be getting, the show, but we're going to be putting it in the right place for more people to find it in the horror genre.
Yeah, I think we're looking forward to the Red Table becoming a much bigger production on its own. This has been a really fun show for us to do so far, especially talking about a genre that you and I both really love, so it's fun to see it stand alone.
Yeah, and we've got some great shows coming up. We have several already planned out. The calendar is already filling up for 2018 for Welcome to the Red Table. So we're very excited about that. Be a lot of good things. So tonight we're talking about the future of horror. There is so much going on in horror right now, and we've had almost a banner year, and really a couple of banner years. One of the things that people kind of on the fringes of this genre, who haven't been deep into it for their entire lives, are saying that, 2017 was the year horror was reborn. I don't really agree with that. Horror has never died. It's just a little bit more accessible to the mainstream, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit during this episode, but it's been a great year for horror, and I'm looking forward to what the future has to offer. And I've said it to you kind of humorously that the future of horror is bright.
Yeah, I would call that a humorous oxymoron.
So we've got some good things. Michael, what is your take? What do you think the future of horror holds? What are we looking at trending right now that is setting the stage for 2018, 19, and beyond?
It seems like we're moving into a much more experimental era, I guess I would say. And at the same time, people in the genre have really seemed to be drilling down themselves to focus in on good stories and good character development. I think maybe part of the reason some people are saying things like, horror has been reborn or something like that is there's nothing wrong with B horror movies. I think I'm a big fan of that side of the genre, but a lot of people can't get into that as well. So with a lot of movies focusing on more of an A rating quality, if you will, I feel like people are flocking to horror movies for the stories and character development, as well as the jump scares and the spook fest. So I think we're seeing it branch out into a lot of different ways. You know, science fiction has always been a part of horror. Other genres have always intermingled with horror, but I see a lot more being played with in terms of what is possible and what is allowed into the story.
Well, and what a lot of people are considering horror. I believe the genre is expanding its reach stylistically. You look at things like the popularity and the success of things like Stranger Things. How many people are watching that would not necessarily consider themselves a horror fan, but I would consider that within the horror genre. But stylistically, it's different. It's expanding on topics and themes in such a way that consumers from every walk are picking up on it and falling in love with it. And I've heard conversations, man, where does that come from? And people get into Lovecraftian conversations. And of course, horror also always does a great job with nostalgia. So it takes us back to a time 20, 30, 40 years ago that was different than the world looks now. And people are buying into that. So, the point in that is that you've got a lot of shows like that in movies and culture within the genre that is expanding its reach stylistically without compromising itself.
Yeah, and I would say even, you talk about going back. I would say think about going back to the days of Vincent Price and some of the things that people did at that time in the genre. The genre was very wide even back then. So I think it is a renaissance of sorts. I wouldn't say it's reborn, but I would say that people are experiencing a very good age.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a couple of times as we talk with Michelle Swope, our guest on today's show. You and I talk later about the accessibility that people have to this genre and what that's meaning for the future. I think another thing that plays into that whole conversation is how people are gaining access, not just the accessibility from a stylistic standpoint, from a quality standpoint, from a mass media standpoint, but how they're gaining access. I think standouts to me, video on demand, streaming services, podcasting, a lot of new media, even though it's not new, it's been around for a while. I don't believe we've reached critical mass with a lot of these media forms, and people are eating it up. I mean, used to, and I don't know if you remember this, but used to, you'd go to the video store and you'd sneak around the horror section looking at all the cool covers and trying to figure out the one you want to take home for the night and, hide out with your friends to watch the horror movie so your parents don't find out. But it was kind of this secret cult type of thing, going to the video store and finding that cool cover and trying to up your scare level from weekend to weekend. Now, video on demand is competing very well with, A-list Hollywood, if you will, and it's very easy for people to jump into that and pick and choose and consume more. Streaming services like Netflix and Shudder and different things are available, and I think those avenues are also providing gateway shows to younger audiences to allow them to kind of get a taste of horror for the future. And I mean, everything from really scary stuff for kids to things that's not so scary but definitely deal with thematic elements. And I think first of all comes to mind is Troll Hunters by Del Toro, getting ready to go into season 2. That definitely had some elements to it that was introducing a younger audience to horror, using a lot of humor, using a lot of quality and animation. But guess what? And Stranger Things is another one of those gateway opportunities for younger audiences. And I see a lot of younger audiences picking up on that and saying, hey, I like this. And they'll become lifelong fans.
Yeah, to illustrate that point, I think the next, or one of the next big Netflix originals coming out, or actually it came out already, was Dark. It was highly recommended for fans of Stranger Things. I feel like Dark is going to be more rooted in the psychological and thriller side of horror. Mm-hmm. So you can definitely see the progression of leading into that genre.
Yeah, and podcasting, I think, again, has not reached its peak, but it's growing rapidly. It has been for many years, and the horror community loves podcasts. Take your pick. There are, any which way you cut it, there are opportunities to get into horror through podcasting, whether as a provider, a content provider, or a listener. You've got all kinds of angles and styles and formats that people are just producing stuff for what they love with horror. So there's a big audience, the horror genre, for podcasting. A lot of these current formats that are kind of wider and more accessible than they used to be are introducing a lot of people to horror in quote unquote a safe way. Not that we need a safe way, but
especially for horror.
Yeah, people coming into it are able to check it out and say, hey, this is pretty cool. I like this. And I can pick my menu on the type of horror I like. You know, and a lot of purists and a lot of hardcore lifelong fans are going to scoff at me for saying something like that. Maybe. I don't know. But the fact is that the world is changing. Media is changing. We have increased access to it, and the styles are expanding through those, and people are finding out more about horror. And I believe things like this, formats like this, and then microfiction. You think about things like creepypastas on video services or Crypt TV, you know, huge popular platform there for short stories brought to film. Those things are changing the face of horror.
They are, and you can even see how they have intermingled with more traditional formats, with things like Channel Zero, now in its second season, taking very popular creepypastas and making them into TV shows. So you see it kind of going both ways and progressing in a number of different varieties.
Yeah, so let's get further into our discussion about the future of horror. We're going to speak with Michelle Swope. She's a writer, and you can find her online. We're going to give you all the details when we talk to her. We go through that with her, steeped in the horror community. Very well respected, and she's got some great insights and some cool recommendations from 2017 and a couple things to look forward to in 2018, and then you and I will come back and cap it off. Let's continue our conversation on the future of horror. Welcome to the Red Table, brand new episode. We have a very special guest with us here today, Michelle Swope, who is a writer for Horror News Net and is just a horror aficionado. And we're very lucky to be speaking to her today. Michael, we're going to be talking about the future of horror. Michelle, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Michelle, before we get started on just talking about horror and all the fun things we love about that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you and our audience can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. And I do want to say thank you so much for having me. I write about horror movies. I started out doing movie reviews for Horror News Net. I also do interviews. I now also write for a site called Anatomy of a Scream, which is female run, and I just started writing for Horror Geek Life, also writing about horror movies. So I've loved horror my whole life. My house is decorated in horror decor all year round. I got married on Halloween. Just I try to incorporate horror into as many parts of my life as I can. So,
well, very cool. And your Twitter handle is Redhead from Mars. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're a redhead from Mars, but you have very pink hair.
Well, it depends on what day of the week it is as far as what color it is. So.
Oh, okay.
I just thought it would be silly to change my Twitter handle every time I change my hair color, so I left it.
Very good.
Fair enough.
Folks, if you want to touch base with Michelle, you can find her on Twitter at Redhead from Mars, and in her bio, she has all the places that she writes for listed there, so you can connect with those different places and read her articles and interviews and her reviews and various things she writes for horror. Michelle, that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you today. We're friends on Twitter, and looking at things that you've written about, you are immersed in the world of horror. I kind of want to get an idea of where we're going with horror. To preface that, I think 2017 especially, but even the past couple of years, have been wonderful years for horror. I think 2017 was a standout year. Now, a lot of people would say it's all about It. The Stephen King's It being brought to a new version in film. But I would disagree with that. I think it's a lot more than that. I think that certainly had a standout moment, and it made a clear statement to the industry that horror is not dead. But I think there's a lot more to this than just It this year. So talk to us a little bit about our current state in the industry. How's horror doing, and what are some of the standout moments for you that you see that has really set the stage for the future of horror?
Well, first I want to say I absolutely agree with what you just said. That, some people, I've seen a lot of people saying things like, oh, 2017, the year that horror was revived, or, horror came back from the dead. And that's really not true, because if you look back, especially at the past few years, we've had some amazing horror. Look back at like 2014, we had The Babadook, It Follows, those kinds of films, and going on from there, especially, we've had some really amazing horror movies. I mean, I'm kind of hesitant to say as far as mainstream versus indie, because certainly It has been phenomenal as far as how well it's done. And even I have friends who don't even like horror movies who went to see it. So I think that says a lot about it. Just as far as, I sometimes look at indie versus mainstream, but I don't really think that it's necessarily one or the other, especially over the past few years. With the films that we've seen do well.
I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. It was a fantastic movie, but there have been several other titles that have done really well. I don't know if The Babysitter is considered to be Netflix. That was a Netflix original. I don't know if that's considered to be mainstream or indie, or if that straddles a line. But there have been a lot of movies like that this year as well that have kind of popped up, reared their heads, and met with some pretty good success.
Right, that's true. And you actually just touched on another thing that I was probably going to bring up at some point. There's been a lot of argument, and even with It, the film It, there's been a whole lot of argument, debate about what you can classify as a horror movie. I've even seen a lot of people out there on Twitter and other social media saying that it's a psychological thriller. I mean, it's about a shape-shifting creature from the days that eats children. I think that's pretty blatantly horror.
Yeah, definitely.
But, as far as the whole argument, and another film is It Comes at Night. There's a whole lot of uproar and debate about whether or not that's classified as horror. But you have to think about that there's a whole lot of subgenres within horror itself. Horror isn't just, black and white.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who would say, slasher movies are horror, and that's where they draw the line. But I think that's kind of subjective. It's an opinion, because we reviewed Little Evil from Netflix a few weeks ago when we talked with Isaac Thorne about the funny thing about horror, comedy being mixed with horror. And a lot of people would say, well, that's not horror. Well, yeah, I think it is. I think it's a subgenre, and it may not be one person's version of horror, but it could be another. And I don't think we need to put boxes around our beloved genre of horror, because horror seeps into so many different aspects of media and entertainment and even life. And I think we need to keep that open, because horror, in my opinion, is very important to understanding a lot of the way the world works these days.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that. Well, I think part of it is that I guess people, the regular people out there, look at horror movie fans as, I think that maybe there's still the stereotype, that we're that weird guy who sits in a dark basement and, watching horror movies.
Right.
And that's just not the reality of it at all, as far as your average horror movie fan.
Yeah, and I would even go so far as to say that is a rarity. I mean, there certainly are those types, but I don't think that represents the higher percentage of, horror fans.
Exactly. But unfortunately, that's still the way that a lot of people view us, I think. And so they don't really like to legitimize horror. So I think that's where a lot of this debate has come from as far as, is this movie horror? Is it not horror? You know, does it, like you were saying, as far as the boxes, I don't like assigning boxes to things either. But for people who don't, you know, who aren't, you know, 24/7 horror fans like some of us are, that's how I think that they look at it. They think that they have to, you know, put it in a box. It has to be, like you said, a slasher movie to qualify as horror, you know, for them to recognize it.
Yeah, and as far as media, as far as entertainment in film and TV, I mean, several standouts for me recently, and not necessarily because I thought they were the best or amazing movies or amazing shows, but because I think they made a good statement for the horror community. But standouts to me, of course, would be It. But also this year, you look at things like The Babysitter, like Michael spoke of. Happy Death Day recently, to me, was a big surprise. And then things like 1922, Gerald's Game, and, you know, the list could go on in terms of TV and film. But I think, you know, like Happy Death Day, I absolutely hated the title. And at first, I didn't want to go see it. And then I learned what it was about and the aspects they were taking, repeating that story over and over. And personally, I can't stand those kind of movies. What was that movie, Michael?
Vantage Point.
Vantage Point. I think it was with Sigourney Weaver many years ago. That drove me nuts. I couldn't stand to watch it. So when I heard Happy Death Day was being filmed the same way, I thought, there's no way I'm going to like this film. So Michael was like, give it a chance. Let's go see it. It's horror. And so I go see it. And you know what? It was surprisingly well written. It was well acted. It was well produced. One of the things I loved about it, it had the capacity to fill that big theater feel, but it still almost felt a little bit indie to me.
Yeah.
I didn't get hung up on the repetition of it because they creatively approached that style of film and the writing was really good. And not only was it funny, not only was it scary in some parts, but I think it also addressed some very important life issues that we're dealing with even culturally today. I thought that was refreshing. And you know what? It was a horror movie and it did really well.
Yeah. I thought that was a really fun movie. And sort of like you, I didn't really care that much for this title, and I didn't really have very high expectations, but I tend to go into any movie with an open mind, you know, no matter what I've heard about it, good or bad. And I that's what I did with that one. And I thought it was fun. I just went with it, you know, like you said, it was scary, it was funny. I also thought the writing was great. The acting was great. It was a fun movie. Yeah, but it was very different. As far as it did also incorporate a lot of comedy, and I think it worked well for that movie.
Yeah, so I think we've got a lot of good standouts. And 2017 certainly was not the year that horror was reborn. Horror fans know that we've been tracking all along. You know, I think I think one of the things that's happening is that, and I talked to somebody the other day about this, is that horror icons are becoming more accepted in mainstream pop culture. And when I say that, I mean, you look at things like Jason and Freddy and Michael and some of those iconic figures from, you know, 20, 30 years ago, and now you see them as little vinyl dolls, you know, the pop vinyl dolls, and you see coloring books, and you see cool t-shirts, and you could go to 3 or 4 different stores in the mall.
They're pretty strong in video games right now.
Yeah, they're huge in video games. What's that game you're playing?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Dead by Daylight. And I was really surprised. People were clamoring for, they got the rights to Leatherface, they got the rights to Michael Myers, and then people were clamoring for Freddy. And when I heard people asking for that, I was like, there's no way that they're going to get the rights to, you know, Freddy for this game. And then this year around Halloween time, they did.
Yeah. And I think some of these people that are walking around with Freddy Krueger keychains, you know, have never seen the film. They have no idea what they're carrying around, but they just think, oh man, it's cool. Scary dude with knives for fingers. So I think there's kind of this general acceptance in mainstream pop culture that the iconic representations of this genre have hit an all-time high, you know, in terms of acceptance. Now I think we have films that are coming out that are high quality, both in the big studio films and in the indie side of films. And people are starting to sit up and pay attention and be like, wait a second, this isn't bad. I like this, and some of it's scary, some of it's funny. I think horror is reaching out to all audiences, and I think that's why we're having this surge right now. And I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I agree with that, but I think it's, at least as far as a lot of the conversations that I've seen, I think that that's where the whole debate has been coming from, as far as, is it horror? This is a horror movie, it's not a horror movie. And I think that people outside of the horror community seem to have a need to, maybe justify the fact that they like these movies that are horror movies, because that's not normally their thing. I've tried to figure out the reasoning behind it, because I've seen so much of it. The whole argument about whether or not a movie qualifies as horror this year, the argument has just been bigger than ever. And like I said, I think maybe they might have some need to justify it. And then also, I think there's still, the crazy stereotype, as I said earlier, about us horror fans and what kind of people we are. Or, we've always been like the weird, uncool people. And, suddenly with people jumping on the horror train, especially this year, I don't know if everyone wants to be associated with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's a difficulty with allowing yourself to associate with some deep, dark corner of your own psyche or your own personality. And, the fact is that the healthier people are the ones that are willing to dig into that a little bit and suss it out. But, again, it's just a stigma. I love that you use the term horror train, though. I can just envision all of us being on a train that's being conducted by Jason, and in the caboose is Michael Myers. We're just on this happy train.
I do agree with the idea of there being a stereotype. A lot of the time, like, I tried to ask a couple friends to come see it with us. We went to see that movie in a fairly large group, but there were some people that said, I won't go near that movie with a 10-foot pole. I hate scary things. And you know what? It had a lot of jump scares, and I'm not usually one to enjoy a lot of jump scares, but it used a lot of jump scares, but it had, more importantly, a great story and great characters. A lot of the other horror movies that have come out this year, though, don't rely a lot on jump scares. They just have really good stories. 1922, it was funny, DC actually, at the end of the movie, was like, because I was talking about it being a horror movie, and I think you said what? It was more of a crime drama, a psychological.
Yeah, it was very
psychological thriller.
It was very psychological. It was almost a murder mystery wrapped up in a very bloody blanket almost.
But it made me think. There was we saw that, and then what was it? Oh yeah, you mentioned it. It Comes at Night. They both had a very particular brand of slow burn horror, and you seem to see that. I mean, obviously that's been around in things like The Grudge before, but that seems to becoming more popular again. This ability to slow down and not worry about any jump scares, but go back to the more unsettling aspects of what really gets under people's skin.
Right. It is psychological. When they say psychological thriller, it is obviously psychological, because a lot of these movies have the ability to really get into your head and, make you deal with unpleasant things that you probably would normally, be dealing with. But yeah, we have definitely seen several films like that recently that, as you said, are slow burn, horror types. And not everyone is into that. Not everyone is into the slow burn. You'll hear a lot of people say the movie was too slow, it was boring, because they didn't want to take the time to sit to go with it all the way to the end. And I think that's unfortunate, because I happen to love those kinds of movies. Usually I do.
It is unfortunate, but it's exciting to see that right now people seem to be more accepting of that and more willing to give it a chance, more so than I think they have been in the past. And maybe, we had a few years in horror that everything seemed to be just about jump scares and slasher films. So maybe it's a desire to go back to some good storytelling. Not that there's anything wrong with slasher films, but they do leave for want of story sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, let's give credit where credit is due. There's always a place for a good old slasher or monster flick, you know? I mean, we can't take away from that aspect of this genre because those are still fun and still necessary and certainly enjoyable by a large portion of people.
Oh, definitely.
Michelle, talk to us about what's out there right now, whether it's indie or big box production, whatever you want to call it. What's out there right now that we should be paying attention to? What have you enjoyed in terms of film or television that's come out in horror in the last year? What stands out to you?
Oh, I have been yelling about The Devil's Candy all year. For me, that is tied obviously with it as far as best horror movie of the year. And I know everyone has been talking about Get Out. I am of the unpopular opinion that I wasn't that impressed with that movie. I think Get Out was more of a social statement, maybe, than I really wanted it to be. You know, I'd like for movies to be, I mean, yes, with everything going on in the world today, I think you may have touched on this a little bit earlier, with all the stuff that's going on in the world around us, we are turning probably more and more to things like horror movies as a escape or a release. But I tried to go in to Get Out with an open mind, and it just didn't do it for me. I know everyone's been raving about that movie all year, but for me, the standout movie of the year, other than it, is definitely The Devil's Candy. Absolutely fantastic film, and it's on Netflix right now, so I've been telling everyone you have no excuse not to see it. As far as indie film, there was a film that came out that I actually got to do a couple of interviews and write-ups about, really early this year, called The Transfiguration. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one. It is also on Netflix right now, too.
No,
there's a lot of really good horror on Netflix right now.
You actually broke up. You actually broke up a little bit when you said the title. Can you repeat the title of that one?
Yeah, it's called The Transfiguration.
I have not seen that.
It's on Netflix. Check it out. It's a vampire story, but told in a way that I'm sure you've never seen it before. So that's all I'm going to say.
That's exciting.
I love vampire stories, so I'll dig into that one for sure. What is The Devil's Candy about? Can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
The Devil's Candy is very metal. There's lots of metal music, so if you like metal music, that part will definitely appeal to you. It stars Ethan Embry, who we all love. We all love Ethan Embry. He's fantastic. It's a movie about a killer who torments his family. But the way that they tell it is, I think, really unique. And it is genuinely scary. It takes a lot to scare me. And there were some parts of this movie that really made me uncomfortable, that scared me, that bothered me. And the movie has stuck with me all year. This movie came out early in the year, and my mind has not been changed so far. I mean, I've told anyone who will listen about this movie.
Well, that's impressive for a movie to stick with someone like you who, I mean, you're obviously consuming a lot and writing a lot and reviewing a lot. So for something like that to stick with you, that says something, I think.
Yeah, I think it does, because I do watch a lot of movies, some good, some bad, but the ones that stick with me or that have some kind of an effect on me, are the ones that I tend to tell people, you've got to see this movie. I can give you some more. There was one called A Dark Song, which is also on Netflix. And by the way, a lot of these movies are done by IFC Midnight.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like I have, I really enjoy IFC Midnight movies for some reason. I know the end of last year they did The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which was really good.
Yeah. IFC Midnight really seems to have stepped up their game in recent years and are really digging deep in terms of their influence in the industry.
I think I remember several years ago.
I think so.
Watching one of their movies for the first time, and it wasn't that great, but then everything since then, again, they have seemed to step up their game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they don't, I don't think every single movie that they put out is fantastic, but the majority of what they've put out in the past couple of years has been, I think, really good, high quality, good horror.
So folks, there you've got 3 recommendations right there outside of the big names that have come out this year: The Devil's Candy, The Transfiguration, and A Dark Song. long. Definitely worth checking out. And like you said, those are all 3 right now on Netflix. So if you have access to that, there you go. No excuse. Michelle, what do we think in terms of the future of horror at this point? Recently, I read a quote, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but Jason Blum has recently said that he feels like the next Freddy Krueger is going to come from a mobile phone. And of course, he's saying that in context of his backing of things like Crypt TV and, many, micro and short story versions of horror that are super accessible to people, whether it be YouTube or Netflix or, short story literature. What do you think about something like that? You think our next big icon is coming from a mobile phone? You think it's coming from short fiction that's turned into really spooky, almost these creepypasta type things?
Yeah, I have seen some really good short horror films this year, especially, and I've written about a few of them. But there is some really great short film out there. Like it is possible to tell a really good scary story in, 5 or 6 minutes. And I don't know if a lot of people, know that that's available. I'm not sure, if people are actually aware of those kinds of things. But yeah, they're really accessible. A lot of them are on YouTube. You can just go in there and watch it. And there is some really good content out there. As far as the future, gosh, for me to say, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, we've seen a really great year for Stephen King. I know that.
Yeah, he's everywhere right now.
I mean, yeah, it could be true. What Jason Blum said. I saw the interview you were talking about with him. Yeah, with people being more and more, reliant on social media and, their phone. And there are, like I said, more and more filmmakers putting their short films out there on, YouTube or video where people can access it easily. That could, I could see it going in that direction. I don't know. I was going to say I hope that we'll see less found footage, but we've actually had a couple of found footage films that were good in the past couple of years. Recently, we had found footage 3D, which is on Shudder, and you can actually watch it in 3D. I've only watched the 2D version so far, but it's definitely worth checking out. It's really well done. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that now that I brought up Shudder, which I'm a huge fan of Shudder, but there is a Shudder app. You can actually watch Shudder on your mobile device. So that kind of goes with what we were talking about as well, as far as people being, more reliant on their phones or their tablets and taking entertainment, taking everything with them wherever they go. So I could certainly, it would make sense to see an increase in short films or streaming services like Shudder, to make it more accessible to people.
Yeah, and I think carriers are working right now to catch up with that so that, you don't have to worry about data and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with you. I think the access and the mobility of, these things is going to increase. How do we top a year like 2017 in film? Do you see anything coming out in 2018 or even 2019 that that's out there on its way to us that you could say, man, I'm really excited for that to show up next year?
I'm really excited about a movie called Death House that is coming out in January. It's directed by Harrison Smith, and it stars pretty much every single horror icon that you could think of. I mean, they got everybody. It looks really good. If you guys don't know about it, definitely check out the trailer. It looks really good. That's the first thing that comes to my mind that I've been looking forward to all year. And we just recently finally got the release date. So January 2018, Death House is coming.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I'm wrong. I'm thinking of a couple of different films, but is that the one where it's almost like a haunted house type setting and all these characters are mashed up inside of this context?
No. I believe it's set in a prison.
Oh, okay. And
there's all these, really creepy characters like Kane Hodder's in it, and he plays this, big creepy guy. It's got, Dee Wallace, Tony Todd, like I said, Kane Hodder, Bill Rose Jr., who I'm a huge fan of. Oh my goodness, I'd have to look at the cast list, but just the cast alone will blow your mind for this movie because they literally got everyone, who we consider to be horror icons. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of something else then. I saw something recently that's supposed to be a haunted house-like setting where there's just this massive cast of characters that are all kind of pressing in on the people who are staying there. And I don't remember the title. I need to go look that up again. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I don't really know. But again, I usually have so many things coming at me as far as new movies that I've got on my radar. So it doesn't sound familiar, but it could be.
Yeah, and I could just be making something up because I want to see it happen. Who knows?
That is a great idea. That is a great idea for movies.
Yeah. In terms of the future of horror, we've seen a lot of reboots in Hollywood in general, a lot of going back to older movies. It came off as a huge success, and I'm looking forward to the second iteration of it. But you also have things like Saw or Jigsaw. You have Leatherface coming back. You have even Halloween coming back now as well. Talks for a new Jason Voorhees that's supposed to fall on a Friday the 13th in a few years. And then you have things that some fans I know are more hesitant to celebrate, like the new Clive Barker, Hellraiser. What do you see happening in horror as far as reboots, and do you think that we'll start to move away from those as that influx finishes?
I generally don't have a problem with reboots. I know there's people out there who just absolutely hate the idea of a reboot or a remake. I don't have an issue with it usually. I haven't seen Jigsaw yet, so I don't have an opinion on that, but I do love the Saw franchise as a whole. I think that there's probably more people out there who appreciate the reboots than the people I was talking about that don't like them. So I'm hoping we will see maybe a few more reboots. Not like an excessive amount, but I think that the ones we've had recently have been done well. So hopefully we'll see some more good reboots. What you mentioned, Halloween is coming up. I think we're all looking forward to that. I know I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah, with Jamie Lee Curtis in there, that is kind of exciting.
Oh yeah. 40 years later. Oh my gosh. That's exciting. Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, like I said, I don't personally have a problem with reboots in general. I'm not saying they're all good, but in general, I'm not that person that has an issue with it.
How important is indie to the big picture of horror now? Obviously, there's always been an indie arm, but in terms of access and growth of the genre overall and the quality that indie is bringing to the table, pretty important. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a huge indie movie fan in general, and I've spent a lot of my time seeking out, the next great indie film, whether it's, horror or another genre, because I'm kind of obsessed with that. But yeah, we have seen a lot of high quality indie film recently, and I think people might, finally be starting to recognize that. So I hope that we're going to see a lot more, and hopefully it will continue to go more mainstream so that more people will, have access to it. I don't feel like everyone has had access to it in the past. A lot of those movies, they'll do the festival circuit or maybe go straight to VOD or have a really limited theatrical release, and not everyone can see them. So I'm hoping that we'll see those kinds of films have bigger releases where more people have access to them, see those movies, because I feel like people are missing out when they can't see the really good indie films.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think gone are the days when indie films are relegated to the backside of an art house in some hidden alleyway of a big city.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You are the indie movie maven. So I've got a couple more questions for you. First of all, favorite indie horror film of all time?
Oh, jeez. I have to pick one?
Okay, maybe your top three.
Wow.
Even that's hard, isn't it?
That is hard. My goodness. Well, I'm going to tell you right off, I am probably the biggest fan of Richard Bates Jr., who makes indie horror. I had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing him a couple months ago, and that was absolutely fantastic. So any of his films would definitely be on my list. Unfortunately, he only has 3 films. I wish he had more, but I know he's working on something new. So either his films are called Excision, which is from 2012, Suburban Gothic, which was 2014, and Trash Fire came out last year in 2016. So, I mean, automatically all three of those films are going to go on my list because I'm a little biased. But gosh, I mean, I could tell you films I've really adored. Things like The Invitation, Green Room. I just was blown away by both of those recently. Oh my goodness. But yeah, there's no way I could pick one. And then of course The Devil's Candy is independent. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, you haven't dropped the Devil's Candy yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to stop talking about The Devil's Candy. I think, in my opinion, other than it, The Devil's Candy is the best horror movie of 2017. And I don't think anything is going to come out in the next month or so that's going to change my mind about that.
Okay, let's move away from indie. Let's talk mainstream. What's your favorite horror movie or top 3 of all time in mainstream, big production?
Oh, wow. Well,
I'm really messing you up here, aren't I?
Yeah, I wasn't prepared. I would have made a list. Because, this is hard. Well, I would immediately have to say A Nightmare on Elm Street, because I have really great memories of that film. I went to see that in the movie theater when it came out, and it scared me so bad. Like, I don't think I slept for a week after that. So definitely A Nightmare on Elm Street. Gosh, probably The Ring. The Ring is up at the top of my list of favorite horror ever, because that scared me really bad. Gosh, oh my goodness, it's so hard. I'm a big fan of Rob Zombie films, so I could put any of Rob Zombie's films on the list.
And that's interesting, because there's a lot of controversial talk, about his films.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a big debate.
So what would be your favorite horror icon? Or do you have a favorite horror icon?
Oh my, that's hard to say too, but I would probably say Tony Todd. I recently did a write-up for Horror Geek Life about Candyman because it just turned 25. And I thought, like, gosh, how has it been 25 years? Because I've always loved that film. I mean, Tony Todd has done a lot of great roles over the years, but I still always associate him with Candyman. And I'd have to say that, Candyman is one of my favorite fictional characters, but also I really have a lot of love and respect for Tony Todd. I think he's a fantastic actor, and yeah, he's probably my favorite movie.
He is good. I mean, just everything about him, his look, his approach to his characters, his voice obviously will stay with you forever.
Yeah, I was going to say his voice.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I
appreciate you having me.
I think we've got a lot to look forward to in horror in the future, and I can't wait to see, how we top 2017 in 2018. And I think there's a lot of good things coming, and I can't wait to see it.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely excited.
Well, folks, if you want to touch base with Michelle, again, Michelle Swope at Redhead from Mars, and in her bio you can see who she writes for, Horror Newsnet, AOAS_XX, and I believe at Horror Geek Life are the 3 main ones that you mentioned. Those are all in your bio. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Listen, you have a wonderful day, and I hope you're feeling better very quickly with this bronchitis you've been dealing with.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope you guys have a great day too.
Thanks, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Michael, it was great speaking with Michelle Swope about the future of horror. She had some great insights, and I'll just repeat here for people listening. She gave some great recommendations on films that maybe you have, but maybe you haven't seen in 2017. Check out The Devil's Candy. Check out The Transfiguration, A Dark Song, and then we're definitely going to be looking forward to Death House in 2018. So good recommendations there, good things to think about. I think the future is, and this is going to be a contrast in words, but I think the future is bright for horror. Or should we say the future is dark? And that's a good thing.
I think either way you could cut it there. I agree. I feel like that part of what we were talking about is it seems to be widening its net, if you will.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with access. Media access for people, is so much easier these days, and I think it's only going to get easier, and I think also length of production in a lot of cases, just like some of these things on Crypt TV are really easy and fast to watch. Creepypastas that people listen to short stories and fiction. I know one of our more popular set of writings that we do is our dark fiction series, KAOS, in our books, and then of course the world that's spinning off of that we're getting ready to release here very soon. And those are all short stories. They're easy to get through. A recent reviewer was like, listen, I sat down with this in an afternoon and I got through this book of stories and loved every bit of it. So I think the access, I think the length, and then over time, what we want to do is we want to take a moment to go just sit down and enjoy a 2-hour movie or read a full-length book and consume those things at our pace in our own time. And I think horror is certainly broadening its reach, both in terms of the audience it's reaching, as far as style, and also as far as length and accessibility. So I think all of those things combined is really making a good look for the future of horror.
Yeah, and I would agree with what you said about access. I think the net has always been wide.
So you don't agree with anything else I just said?
No, I agree with the rest of it too.
Okay. Just making sure.
But I'm really happy with this year as far as horror goes, because we've had such a wide range of different stories. I enjoy a good old-fashioned jump scare horror movie just as much as anybody else in the horror community, but seeing The Devil's Babysitter, where you have this kid, you take the movie from the perspective of a very innocent kid who realizes that his babysitter, who he's always had as this great protector and friend and almost a mentor of sorts.
Yeah, and he's got a huge crush on too.
Yeah, but he realizes she's leading a satanic cult.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a paradigm shift, if you will. But that's a very fresh take. And then you have everything from Happy Death Day, which we've spoken about, to the slow burn horror movies like 1922. And you could even go so far as to say that Stranger Things dips its toe in Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
With some of the monsters and the imagery that it uses.
And listen, there's a lot of people, and I'm going to stop you there. There's a lot of people that argue, again, the whole debate, does Stranger Things fit into horror? Does Happy Death Day fit into horror? I think they do. I think because of some of the elements and the subject matter that they covered, they do, but it's a broader range. It's a bigger box, and I think they do it really well. And what I'm really happy about some of those is the level of storytelling involved.
Yeah, and I think the key word, again, is access. I think those have always been out there. I think horror has always had that wide range, but what most people think of horror does not include that. So people are starting to see these released, and the word horror is becoming synonymous with all of these different stories, and it's starting to click that, hey, horror can actually be a really good quality medium. We know it always has been, but I think people are getting access to good stories, and they're becoming more aware that, it's out there.
Yeah. Well, and horror is not just about movies.
That's true.
It's about literature. It's also about gaming. There's a lot in the world of gaming that is upon us with regards to horror that is quality and it's fun, and again, it's accessible. I can think of a couple. The one that you're playing right now,
Dead by Daylight.
Yeah, and also one that we interviewed a couple of guys back in December of last year, I think, from Australia, who are developing the game Hellhunter. And to me, that's a horror-based.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Obviously a lot of fantasy and a lot of crime fighting and stuff like that. And
it definitely has a forensic feel to it. But if you watch the trailer, you're walking around a room and all of a sudden you don't see the creature and you see where the creature should be, but you see a giant shadow of a spider running across you. That's kind of, that's horrific.
So we've got a lot of that. Gaming is a big place for horror to come alive and reach a new audience and a whole new generation of consumer.
Well, yeah, and that's video games. I'm always going to take it back to tabletop as well, and that has never died out. In fact, I think most people probably know at this point, if they've listened to the Monster Guys podcast, I'm a big fan of Lovecraft. It has gotten to a point where I'm trying to find board games that don't have anything to do with Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And that's saying something for me.
Yeah.
Board games and role-playing games are still thriving in horror. A lot of zombie-based games of surviving have been fun because instead of, playing a competitive board game like Monopoly, you're trying to work with a team of people to survive. And it's funny. You play with these little plastic figures and you draw these cards, but what you find is that you start role-playing these things in your head and you start playing out like they would in the movies. You start forming these alliances that are shifty and sometimes unstable, similarly to what you see in the movies.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned maybe on our last episode when we spoke with Isaac Thorne, or maybe it was the one before that when we talked about The Thing, about the board games that were coming out, the tabletop games that were coming out based on that franchise. And if I remember right, I think just this past week, I was reading an article and a conversation with people where one of those actually hit the table at a convention, sold out immediately, and they couldn't keep up with production. And now they're just continuing as they can to get it out. There's a huge demand for it. It's quality, and it wasn't cheap to pick up, but man, people are eating it up.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, I mean, the board game industry is in a good spot still, and it has been for a few years. Another one that I've recently found out about, and I really would love to play it because it just looks like dumb fun, is Mixtape Massacre.
You told me about that.
It's a pretty board game, number one, but it also looks very fun, very campy, 80s horror, where you actually play as the different horror icons. And they're not the exact horror icons, they didn't get the names for Freddy and Jason, but you have these horror archetypes that you play as, and you're trying to go out and get all the people in town, basically. And what's interesting is that we start to see crossover where I think Blumhouse was actually one of the sponsors of that board game, or they've got their name attached somehow, where they helped make sure that board game came to life.
Yeah, I think they've got their hands in just about everything with horror right now, somehow.
So it's nice to see, and that may be part of the reason that horror has had a good year. You have these different genres and these different mediums that are starting to really come together very well. And maybe that's where access and awareness starts to build up as well. It's not a divided, I like my subgenre over here, you stay over there with your subgenre. People are starting to combine almost like a giant weird transformer, if you will.
Yeah, that's strange to think of in terms of horror, but I guess it works. So again, I think the future looks really good, really strong. I'm looking forward to, and I don't like reboots a lot. I think a lot of times they're done wrong. They take on a vision that doesn't match the history. But I think we've got some reboots coming that actually feeds into the history and plays with it and does it right. I'm looking forward to some of the reboots in film. I'm looking forward to playing some of the games. And of course, I like collecting things. So I like the toys, I like the shirts, I like the posters. There's a lot of cool stuff out there right now that, used to I wouldn't buy a lot of that kind of stuff because it would just seem like stuff to sit on a shelf. And I'm not so much into that, but there's some stuff out there right now that I feel like they have a bit of meaning and they have a bit of nostalgia and they have a place on my shelf. So I'm looking forward to that. And what that really means is that, again, the access to this genre is growing. The audience who's willing to consume this because of how it's being presented is growing. It's like Michelle was talking about. There's this old stereotype of some dude sitting in a basement in the dark, mold growing all around him, watching nothing but slasher movies. And that is, first of all, an outdated and an incorrect view of the consumer of this genre. So let's go back and listen to our interview with Isaac Thorne on the last episode of Welcome to the Red Table. Very intelligent, very smart, very well written. Listen, that's the future. That's the future of horror. But let me say this, it's the history of horror as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny that you say that, because when you go back and look at the, even before movies where, horror just was literature, that was it. Horror was literature, and it was produced by people who were very intelligent and had a grasp on history and where these strange and terrifying things come from, number one. So it was almost academic and almost a little bit dusty.
I'm excited. I think it's a good time. If you have any insights, the future of horror that you're thinking about, I'd love to hear about it. Just look us up at themonsterguys.com or at themonsterguys on Twitter. Talk to us about it. Obviously, there's a lot more that we haven't talked about here, and we'd love that conversation to continue. What are you looking forward to in 2018? What was your favorite highlight of 2017? Where do you see this going? And should we reach a larger audience? That's a question some people are asking. Does it get too big at some point? I don't know. I think right now we're just in a good spot, and it's going to be a lot of fun for the next few years. So with that in mind, you guys have an awesome week here in the U.S. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be deep into the holiday season. So I would encourage you to take some time for family and friends and find the very best horror you can to put under the tree and in the stockings. Live it up a little bit.
Well, now we're going into Krampus territory.
Now we're going into Krampus, and I don't mind that at all.
I'm okay with it.
And speaking of Krampus, the movie from just a couple years ago that came out wasn't anything to shake a stick at. So
Yeah, and apparently that universe is supposed to be expanded. We'll see.
I think they've talked about it. We'll see. You know, that may be a cool tradition. Watch the Krampus movie during Christmas season every year.
Well,
it definitely
is a good
would.
moral reminder.
Yeah,
to
it would be a great reminder, and it would also be a great contrast to all the happy joy that's out there right now. So
Very true.
you guys, listen. Have a great week. Be safe. Be kind to one another. Let us know your thoughts on the future of horror. Thanks for hanging out with us here at Welcome to the Red Table. I'm DC.
And I'm Michael.
See ya.
My name is Frederick Jebediah Bucephalus Abel St. Meyer the 13th, and if you ain't hearing me, You ain't listening.